First off, I want to thank you all for the amazing support you've shown to the podcast. How many times you have started hours-long podcasts and never able to finish, and when you went back, you find it difficult to connect with podcasts. To avoid that, please subscribe to most advanced, featured, and accurate quick podcast summaries on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. It will save you from spending 15 to 20 hours per week catching up. It's a great way to stay informed while saving time for less than the price of candy in most places. Here's a rundown on the science of childhood bullying and adult mental health, featuring Dr. Tracy Vaillancourt by Chris Williamson. Dr. Tracy Vaillancourt's interest in studying bullying followed with her fascination with popularity. She noticed that the kids who bullied the most at her high school were also the most popular. Her research found that these popular kids were 4 times more likely to bully others than those who didn't have power or popularity. Over the past 25 years, research on bullying has evolved from documenting its prevalence to examining individual factors associated with it. Dan Olveus conducted a large longitudinal study in Norway, finding that kids who bullied others were more likely to be involved in the criminal justice system by age 24. Vaillancourt's own research has focused on the neurobiology of bullying, aiming to show how it profoundly affects individuals and puts them at risk for the rest of their lives. Despite the progress made in bullying research, there is still much to be done. Vaillancourt believes that understanding why interventions don't work is crucial. She points out that the most popular kids in school are often the ones who are most resistant to bully intervention programs, as they don't want to give up their power-holding position. The motivations behind bullying are complex, but Vaillancourt suggests that the corrupting influence of power is a primary driver. Kids who bully others often have assets and competencies that the peer group values, such as good looks or athletic ability. These kids use aggressive means to maintain their power and achieve hegemony. Vaillancourt estimates that about 90% of kids who bully others fit this profile. Vaillancourt also distinguishes between implicit and explicit power. Implicit power is achieved through competencies and assets that the peer group values, while explicit power is achieved through coercive means. Kids who bully others often have a mix of both types of power. The personality profile of a typical bully is characterized by high levels of narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathic traits. They are often socially skilled, well-adjusted, and able to justify their behavior. They are able to manage and manipulate interpersonal relationships, which requires a certain level of cognitive skill. The idea that bullies come from broken homes is a common misconception. While there is an overrepresentation of kids from dysfunctional homes who exhibit aggressive behavior, there is no evidence to suggest that kids from broken homes are more likely to bully others. Vaillancourt emphasizes the importance of distinguishing between aggression and bullying. Bullying involves a power imbalance and repeated behavior, whereas aggression is a more general term that can encompass a range of behavior. She notes that victims of bullying often fare poorly due to the power imbalance and repeated nature of the behavior. If Vaillancourt were to create a meal that represented bullying, she would include ingredients such as power imbalance, inability to fight back, social exclusion, and repeated behavior. They may come across as confident and self-assured, but this can be a facade that hides underlying issues. These bullies are often able to treat people poorly without worrying about the consequences, and this behavior can snowball into more extreme forms of aggression. However, if they become too extreme, they risk alienating themselves and losing their power base. In contrast, kids who are victimized by bullies may experience a range of negative outcomes, including social isolation, anxiety, and depression. They may also be more likely to engage in self-destructive behaviors, such as substance abuse or self-harm. The impact of bullying can be long-lasting, affecting not only the individual, but also their relationships and overall well-being. Research suggests that around 30% of the population is victimized by bullies, with 10% experiencing ruthless bullying on a daily basis. In terms of those who bully others, the prevalence rate is lower, around 8%, although this number may be underreported due to the stigma associated with admitting to bullying behavior. The benefits of bullying for the perpetrator can include maintaining power and popularity, which can be useful in later life. However, there are also costs to bullying, including the potential for more difficult relationships and a greater sense of entitlement. Bullies may also become more isolated and less empathetic over time, which can make it harder for them to form healthy relationships. In terms of the types of people who get bullied, research suggests that kids who are shy, socially withdrawn, or neurodivergent may be more vulnerable. Kids who are girls with ADHD or who are atypical in some way may also be more at risk. Additionally, kids who don't have the same economic or social status as their peers may be more likely to be targeted by bullies. Bullying can also exploit the fundamental need to belong, which is a universal human need. Bullies may use social exclusion and manipulation to control and dominate others, which can be incredibly damaging to the victim. The impact of bullying can be long-lasting, affecting not only the individual, but also their relationships and overall well-being. The relationship between bullying and social status is complex, with some bullies using their power and prestige to dominate others. However, this can also create a culture of fear and intimidation, where others are reluctant to intervene or support the victim. In some cases, bullies may even use their power to create a sense of social singling, where the victim is isolated and excluded from social interactions. Research has also shown that there are ethnic group differences in bullying, with some groups being more vulnerable to bullying than others. However, this is not necessarily due to the ethnicity or race of the individual, but rather the social dynamics of the school or community. For example, if a school is predominantly white, a black student may be more vulnerable to bullying. However, if a school is predominantly black, a white student may be more vulnerable. In terms of the relationship between overweight and bullying, research suggests that kids who are overweight or obese are more likely to be bullied. However, this is not necessarily because they are overweight, but rather because they are more vulnerable to bullying. One study found that kids who were bullied were more likely to gain weight over time, which can create a vicious cycle of bullying and weight gain. Attractiveness can be a protective mechanism against bullying, with kids who are perceived as attractive being less likely to be targeted by bullies. However, this can also create a culture of beauty and status, where kids who are perceived as unattractive are more vulnerable to bullying. Skinny boys, in particular, may be vulnerable to bullying, as they are perceived as less masculine. Thin girls may also be bullied, although this can be more complex and nuanced. For boys, it's about not being sufficiently masculine, not having that dominance or physical presence that says, "Don't mess with me." For girls, it's about being seen as potential sexual competition, even at a young age. There was a study that showed this curve, where both really thin kids and overweight kids have poor mental health, but it's more prevalent on the overweight side. This could be explained through peer processes. The conversation then shifts to the difference between girl bullying and boy bullying. Boys are more obvious in their bullying, valuing dominance and submission, while girls use indirect aggression, like spreading rumors or excluding someone from the peer group. Girls are more likely to use relationships as a vehicle to cause harm, and they're more instrumental in their approach. Boys, on the other hand, are more reactive. The topic of cross-sex bullying comes up, and it's noted that it mostly happens in elementary school. However, it's also mentioned that little boys can be mean to girls and vice versa, especially when they're young and haven't yet received the memo about what's acceptable behavior. 1. The conversation then delves into the idea that girls start practicing indirect aggression early on, even as young as 3 or 4 years old. This is seen as a way of honing a skill for the future, and it's noted that girls have superior verbal and social skills from a young age. The concept of heterotopic continuity is brought up, which suggests that indirect aggression is a skill that's developed over time, and it's something that society tolerates. The discussion then turns to the idea that sex differences exist, and that it's not just about socialization. Research has shown that even at a young age, there are differences in the way boys and girls interact, and that these differences are not just limited to humans. The example of a golden retriever refusing to look at its owner because it's mad is brought up, and it's noted that this is an example of love withdrawal, a form of indirect aggression. The conversation then shifts to the topic of how parents model behavior for their kids and how this can affect their relationships and attachment styles. The idea that parents who stick together for the sake of their kids but are miserable in their relationship may be teaching their kids that this is what love looks like. The importance of attachment theory is brought up, and it's noted that kids need to see healthy relationships modeled for them. The conversation touches on the idea that the threshold for when a marriage should break up has been lowered too much, and that sometimes staying together can be more harmful than beneficial. The importance of finding interventions for relationships and modeling healthy behavior for kids is emphasized. Dr. Tracy Vaillancourt points out that when families break up, women and children are often left in poverty, which can have a profound impact on their well-being. Poverty, she explains, is a huge stressor that can actually change the brains of children. This is a crucial factor to consider when discussing the effects of family breakups.
Chris Williamson notes that a broken home isn't just a broken home. It's often a poor home, and a poor home is a stressed home.
Dr. Vaillancourt agrees, emphasizing that these factors need to be separated and accounted for. The conversation then turns to the topic of bullying, specifically among LGBT youth. Dr. Vaillancourt notes that these kids are often poorly treated and have higher rates of mental health issues.
Chris Williamson suggests that it's difficult to know whether these kids are mentally distressed because they're trans, or because they're trans because they're mentally distressed.
Dr. Vaillancourt agrees that the temporal precedence hasn't been established due to the politicization of the issue.
Chris Williamson points out that there are significantly higher rates of OCD, autism, and neurodivergence in these groups, and that it's essential to consider the well-being of kids who can't advocate for themselves. He notes that the discussion around trans youth can become fraught, but it's crucial to hold multiple perspectives in mind.
Dr. Vaillancourt explains that bullies often use moral disengagement to justify their behavior, dehumanizing their victims and blaming them for their own mistreatment. She notes that this is a cognitive strategy that allows people to live with themselves after engaging in bad behavior.
Chris Williamson asks about the process of moral disengagement, and Dr. Vaillancourt explains that it involves dehumanizing the victim, blaming them, diffusing responsibility, and making advantageous comparisons. The conversation then turns to the topic of why bullying happens so much in schools.
Dr. Vaillancourt notes that it's a complex issue involving social skills, brain development, and resource scarcity. She explains that kids in schools are often vying for limited resources and that this can lead to bullying. She also notes that kids are not yet socially skilled and are still developing morally and cognitively.
Chris Williamson asks about the impact of bullying on victims, and Dr. Vaillancourt explains that it affects all aspects of their life, including their mental and physical health, academic achievement, and sense of self. She notes that the effects of bullying can last a lifetime, with studies showing that individuals who were bullied as children can still have higher mental health rates decades later. The reason behind this is that the pain of bullying is so salient and disruptive that it serves a function for the individual to never forget. This social pain is seared in the amygdala, making it hard for people to move past it. Even if they may get better over time, the visceral reaction to the memory of bullying can still be present. This has an evolutionary significance, as not belonging is a massive neural alarm that helps humans collaborate and get ahead as a species. The conversation then shifted to the topic of biological or genetic vulnerabilities to the effects of bullying.
Dr. Tracy Vaillancourt explained that while there may be some genetic predispositions, it's not the primary focus of her work. Instead, she emphasized the importance of individual differences in how people deal with bullying. Some people are more sensitive to cues of belonging and not belonging, while others may be more anxious or have a different worldview. These differences can affect how a person responds to bullying. Dr. Vaillancourt also discussed the concept of heterogeneity, highlighting that some kids do better than others when it comes to dealing with bullying. However, the kids who do better are often seen as the poster child, and the ones who struggle are viewed as having something wrong with them. She emphasized the need to understand the individual differences and how they affect a person's response to bullying. The conversation then touched on the topic of overcoming childhood bullying as an adult. Dr. Vaillancourt mentioned that she has focused more on the ones who aren't doing well, but there is a need to understand how people can overcome the effects of bullying.
Chris Williamson suggested that therapy, such as cognitive behavioral therapy, could be helpful in reprogramming the worldview that may have been shaped by bullying.
Dr. Vaillancourt also shared some of her research findings, including the fact that reducing bullying in schools can actually make the few kids who are still bullied more vulnerable. This is due to attribution errors where the kids who are bullied may think that there's something fundamentally wrong with them. She emphasized the need for schools to recognize this and provide support to the kids who are still being bullied. The conversation also addressed the common argument that bullying is good for developing resilience. Dr. Vaillancourt strongly disagreed with this notion, suggesting that it's a way for people to cope with their past experiences. She emphasized that it's essential to distinguish between achieving something because of bullying and achieving something in spite of bullying. It emphasized the need to understand individual differences and provide support to those who are struggling. The discussion also touched on the importance of reprogramming the worldview that may have been shaped by bullying, and the need to address the attribution errors that can occur when bullying is reduced in schools. As a professor of counseling psychology, she's seen firsthand the devastating impact of bullying on individuals, particularly those with poor interpersonal relationships. The statistics are staggering, with only 20% of interventions showing any real reduction in bullying, and even then, it's mostly in younger kids. Vaillancourt believes that the key to tackling bullying lies in understanding its essence. It's part of the human condition. She draws on her research with renowned psychologist Richard Tremblay, which shows that kids are socialized out of aggression, not into it. However, some individuals, often high status and popular, come into the picture with a need for dominance and a Machiavellian worldview. These are the ones who create the norms and socialize the group. The current most commonly used anti-bullying interventions, such as the Kiva program and the Always Anti-Bullying program, have shown some success, but it's limited. Vaillancourt argues that these programs focus too much on awareness and involvement, rather than addressing the root causes of bullying. She suggests that a more effective approach would be to engage the bystanders, as they're the ones who afford the bully power. Vaillancourt also emphasizes the importance of social-emotional learning, which has been shown to reduce aggression. However, there's a growing anti-social emotional learning movement in the U.S., which views it as an overreach of schools into the purview of parents. Vaillancourt disagrees, citing the strong evidence supporting its effectiveness. The conversation turns to the impact of bullying on memory, with Vaillancourt explaining that it can lead to increased cortisol levels, affecting areas of the brain high in glucocorticoid receptor sites. This, in turn, can impair verbal memory and episodic memory. Vaillancourt's research has shown that kids who are bullied have poorer memory as a consequence of the poor treatment. The discussion also touches on the role of increased supervision in reducing bullying. Vaillancourt argues that it's one of the most effective ways to reduce bullying, citing a study that showed a 50% reduction in bullying during the pandemic due to increased supervision. She suggests that schools should invest in supervision rather than relying on programs, and that even small changes, such as having teachers greet students at the door, can make a big difference. Vaillancourt emphasizes the need to create inclusion, rather than just stopping bullying. She notes that even if kids are not actively bullied, they can still be isolated and excluded, and that this is a fundamental human motivator. The kids thought they were being spied on by the ladies, and as a result, bullying rates decreased. This led to the idea of making grandmothers great again. The concept of spatial planning intervention was discussed, where scary spaces in schools, like bathrooms, can be designed to reduce bullying. The topic of school trips and the back of the bus was brought up, and how these situations can be breeding grounds for bullying. The conversation then shifted to the interaction of nature and nurture, and how parents who were bullied can pass on their experiences to their children. The way parents perceive ambiguous situations can influence their child's perception, creating a threat sensitivity. This can lead to the child seeing threats where there may not be any, and behaving differently as a result. Social interactions are complex, and this can influence how others perceive the child. The differences between childhood bullying and workplace bullying were discussed, and how people who were bullied as kids may be more likely to be bullied in the workplace. There's a concept of polyvictimization, where people who experience bullying in one area of life may be more likely to experience it in other areas. The idea of victim shopping was brought up, where perpetrators try out their behavior on different victims to see how they react. This can happen in childhood and may also occur in adulthood. She can be found on X, LinkedIn, and Google Scholar, and will be appearing on the podcast again next year. Thank you for tuning in. Please click follow button, and just remember, subscription is only $1 per month. Leave a comment or review. Until next time, happy listening.